Top 10 head kicks knockout in UFC. When it comes to combat sports, only a few things can match the thrill and excitement that come with a head kick knockout. It provides a good showing for the highlight reel, but more importantly, it gets the fans off their feet and creates an enigmatic atmosphere that we've all come to love. So in today's video, we present you with the 10 most brutal and incredible head kick knockouts we've witnessed in the UFC. Number 10. Kevin Lee vs. Gregor Gillespie. There were some doubts about whether a struggling Kevin Lee would be open to fighting an in-form Gregor Gillespie, particularly after suffering a 2-fight losing streak. However, the former didn't seem to be fazed by this risk, and he jumped at the opportunity as soon as it arrived, and his confidence eventually paid off. Despite Gillespie being the better fighter, Lee showed his experience on fight night. The Michigan native began his assault with a powerful overhand right, and just before his opponent could regain consciousness, he followed up with a devastating leg head kick. Of course, Gillespie couldn't withstand the impact of this stunning head kick, which would go on to earn Kevin Lee the award of the performance of the night. More significantly, this deadly knockout now ranks as one of the most lethal finishing moves in UFC history. Number 9. Georges St. Pierre vs. Matt Hughes II. Coming into this fight, Georges St. Pierre had his work cut out, having lost to Matt Hughes in an earlier encounter. In fact, Hughes was responsible for handing George the first defeat of his career, and at the time, the former was in unstoppable form. But after watching the clips of his defeat for several hours, George went back to the drawing board to re-strategize, and he came into the rematch as a different fighter. Hughes lived up to his antecedent by dominating the first few exchanges of the fight, but George held on well, and by the time he got into his rhythm, he orchestrated a perfect switch kick that landed cleanly on Hughes' head to wrap up the fight in the second round. Owing to this result, Georges St. Pierre earned himself the Knockout of the Night award even as he became the first Canadian UFC champion. Number 8. Rashad Evans vs. Sean Salmon. Early on in his career, Rashad Evans relied heavily on takedowns and clinch tactics to see out his opponents. But as he continued to learn his trade in the MMA, he began to improve the striking part of his game, which earned him several famous knockouts throughout his career, and perhaps one of his favorite knockouts would be the one he delivered to Sean Salmon in the Man in Even a UFC Fight Night. The fight was only in the second round when Evans decided he wanted an early end to the evening. He got himself into the right position and delivered a brutal roundhouse kick to drop Salmon within a twinkle of an eye. Number 7. Junior Dos Santos vs. Mark Hunt. The UFC 160 bout between Junior Dos Santos and Mark Hunt at the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas was a blockbuster that many fans were looking forward to, particularly in terms of knockouts and entertainment, and thankfully, it didn't disappoint. Although the spectators had to wait for a while, when the big moment eventually arrived, it was worth the wait. As we approached the dying embers of the third round, Dos Santos delivered a blink-and-miss-it spin kick that made contact with Hunt's head, and the rest, as they say, is history. The impact left Mark Hunt unconscious and sent him crashing to the canvas. Number 6. Mirko Cro Cop vs. Gabriel Gonzaga. The UFC 67 event saw Mirko Cro Cop go head-to-head against Brazilian fighter Gabriel Gonzaga. Gabriel was famous for his tricky submission skills, but against Cro Cop, he changed tactics. Rather than focus on taking down Cro Cop with his submission skills and grappling heavy moves, he decided to beat his opponent at his own game by settling the fight with the very move that Cro Cop is known for, and he did so in remarkable fashion. Not only did Gabriel Gonzaga head kick his way to a fascinating victory, but this stunning move was so memorable that it was carved in the archives of history as one of the greatest head kicks ever in the history of the UFC. Number 5. Valentina Shevchenko vs. Jessica Eye. At number 5 is a well-deserved entry from the women's side of the UFC. Having claimed the women's flyweight title, Valentina Shevchenko was expected to defend it against Jessica Eye, who was riding on the back of 3 consecutive wins. But Shevchenko showed immense quality and composure. Deploying her Muay Thai and impressive footwork, Valentina Shevchenko was moving with a great level of dexterity around Eye. This continued even in the second round, and just 27 seconds into the round, the defending champion released a lightning-quick left head kick that instantly knocked out Eye. The level of pain and damage done to Eye could have been much worse, but the referee was compassionate enough to call the fight off. Number 4. Josh Thompson vs. Nate Diaz. All through his career, Nate Diaz had only been knocked out once. While this showed the strength and endurance of Diaz, it also highlighted the sheer power of the opponent who took him to the cleaners on that one occasion. And in case you are wondering, the man behind this shocking knockout is none other than Josh Thompson. Thompson seized the initiative and began landing several body shots and headshots early in the second round. But towards the back of the round, he produced a flush right head kick that sent Nate Diaz to Wonderland. In fairness to Diaz, he did try to recover from the impact of the head kick, but Thompson made sure that was impossible by landing several more punches to finish off the fight for good. Number 3. Yves Edwards versus Josh Thompson. Josh Thompson makes another appearance, but this time not as the conqueror. The fierce fighter was up against Yves Edwards at UFC 49 in the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas, and judging by his form prior to the fight, one would have expected him to come out with a win, but that wasn't to be. Edwards seized control of the fight and swung a wild flying head kick to seal a well-deserved victory. Number 2. Edson Barboza versus Terry Edom. Edson Barboza's fighting skills are often underrated, but as far as strikers go in the UFC, he is one of the best acts in the sport. This was particularly evident in the Brazilian's fight against Terry Edom at UFC 142. In the final round of this exciting matchup, Barboza landed a spinning heel kick, one of the most brutal we've seen in the history of the sport. It was so swift and well-timed that by the time it made impact with Edom, it was lights out. This remarkable victory saw Barboza clinch the 3 accolades, including the knockout of the fight of the night, as well as the knockout of the year. Number 1. Anderson Silva versus Vitor Belfort. At number 1, we have the brawl at UFC 126 between Anderson Silva and Vitor Belfort. Prior to this fight, Belfort had racked up a couple of knockouts, but this time against Silva, he ended up on the wrong side of a devastating front head kick from his opponent. It was a picture-perfect moment that is seen today as one of the most iconic finishes not only in the history of the UFC, but in the history of combat sports. Considering the reputations of both fighters, it's probably not an unexpected result, and for every UFC fan that would have been looking forward to such a dramatic end to the fight, they certainly were not disappointed.